Clyde Ermit Stafford was born on June 11, 1909, at Black Springs, Arkansas. The son of Alfred Monroe Stafford and Etta Lorraine Calloway Stafford, who had been married since November of 1866. He was the couple's ninth child. Well, barely.
My mother, they called a doctor, and he came out, and he brought his wife with him for to be the nurse and help him with it, because he kind of thought that she was going to have twins. He told her that she'd have twins, but when she gave birth to me, it was around 11 o'clock in the night, and so they told my mother that she had another and she was going to have the other, and she was so near give out that she kind of wanted to give up and not have the baby, and so they had to work so hard to keep her going till they got excited, all of them, and it was 1 o'clock when the next baby was born. It was my twin sister, and they didn't know what time that she'd been born. She'd been born sometime. They knew after midnight, but they put it down that she's born an hour later than me, which made her just a little under 12 o'clock, made us twins. But if they said if they knew and kept the time right, that she would have been born the next day.
The Staffords raised 11 children. Pearl, who was born in 1890, followed by Alice in 1892. Carl was born in 1894, and Everett in 1897. Elgin arrived in 1899, followed by Aris in 1901. The birth of Ava occurred in 1904, with Doyle arriving in 1906. The twins, Clyde and Cleo, were born in 1909, with the baby, Aldridge, being born in 1912.
We had to raise everything we eat, if we got it. People back in the farm days, they had to practice raising on the farm what they lived on. Everybody done that in the teens and the 20s, and so we moved into town and had a farm just across Cattle River from town, and we done raised all of our food and stuff over there, and Mother kept boarders, and so Horace Biggs wanted to put in some onions. So he got 20 acres from us and got a little team of mules, and small, so they would plow those onions where the rows was 16 inches apart, and had a fella to do the plowing, and he put me over those onions, and I was 14 to 15, 16-year-old, somewhere in that neighborhood. And he would tell me what he wanted me to do. Instead of him having it done, he had me to do it. And I nearly kept those onions, the weeds, big weeds and stuff, pulled out of myself, but we chopped some of it. What we did was hoeing, but they had to pull that dirt from those onions so the onion would be out of the ground and make it. There's a certain way of growing those onions that people had to know. We never had that any experience, but before it was over with, we'd had some. But they made good onions, and we had a lot of experience in running them, but Horace just made the one crop, and that's all he made. But he taught me to, and told me, he says, don't never tell anybody lies. Says, you tell them people that they can work, well, they can work. And if they don't work, well, says, you tell them if they don't work. And says, you manage them that way. And I was just only a kid, but he had me over there. And there was kids that was doing the work. But he had me managing the working of that crop of onions. That was in 1900. That was before this. That was out on the, when we moved to the, from South Fork, moved to Polk Creek, why I had to do the plowing, and Daddy bought first riding cultivator that was that I'd ever seen. And everything, though, had to be plowed and planted with that cultivator because they tied the feet together to lay it off. And that way it'd make them true distance apart. So when you plowed with that cultivator, it'd plow those rows with the same distance without plowing everything up. We'd been used to plowing and laying off rows with what we called single stock and one horse. And that way the row would be like a snake crawling. It'd just vary backwards and forwards. And if you plowed it with that riding cultivator, it'd plow up half the stuff. But if you planted it with a riding cultivator, the feet was put the same distance apart, and so was the rows. And you could plow it, and Daddy would put this horse out there, and he'd plow them 2 or 3 rounds. And if them horses was put and walked in the fur or on the ridge 2 or 3 rounds, that's the way he'd walk all day long. He was so well trained, he'd do what he was trained to do, and that'd train him the 2 or 3 rounds. Then he turned over to me, and all I had to do was just turn him at the end. And I was 9 and 10 years old and helped Dad make crop that year because the boys had went to the Army. The older boys had taken them out and took them in the Army, and that was in 18 and 19. My older brothers and sisters, see, the brothers went in the Army and the sisters all got married. The older ones, there was 11 of us in family. And there was still about 6 of us that was younger that stayed at home, and we had to make crops that the older brothers and sisters had been making. We had to step in and take their place because the rest of them got married and went to the Army and didn't leave anything but the young crew to do the farming, do the keeping things up.
Clyde married his high school sweetheart, Rosebud Doughton, on June 10, 1933, at Black Springs. It was the culmination of a long courtship and the beginning of a partnership that has lasted a lifetime.
From about the 6th grade, as far as I was concerned then, he was just one of those Stafford kids.
Well, Mr. Doughton had a store joining our house in town there, and Rosebud was around the store right smart, and of course I was in the store and out, and we played together to where back when we was children, and didn't realize we'd ever get to be friends enough to marry, and didn't even think about such a thing. And we played in the trees and stuff in our front yard, and what we call skinning cats on limbs when we were just little fellers. And then we went ahead, went all the way through school together that way. And she'd come to the schoolhouse after we got older. She'd want me to come to the house. We had a certain way of whistling, and she could whistle and call me to the schoolhouse, and I could whistle and tell her I'd be there. By the way we whistled, we had a secret way of calling each other by that whistle, and our folks all knows it now. And I can go into a crowd of people, be a quarter of a mile away from her, and call her and tell her to come to me, or I'm going to her by the way I whistle, and she can do the same thing. We whistle through her teeth.
He's lost some of it.
My false teeth kick a lot of it, but I can still, she can whistle and I can whistle. To get out there and whistle, and you can hear us a quarter of a mile with that keen whistle. And people won't notice that you can be in a crowd of people, and I can call her, and I walk away from them about 10 steps, 15. They won't think about me whistling, but if you used to holler, they'd pay attention to it, and they won't think about me being calling her. And we've done that all of our life, ever since we was children. We've taken it up and learned it and got it worked out to where we know which way, whether I'd go to her or she'd come to me. If I whistled twice and cut it off while I was coming to her, and she whistled the same way back to me while I was to go to her, and that was the way we called each other when we'd go to the school. She'd come to school early and want me to come up there. She wanted to see me about something, or she'd read a book, and she had her book report on it and wanted to give me the book report, or something she wanted to see me about. A lot of times I was peddling beef, and I had to run a business all the time while I was in the school, either for my daddy or myself. And I peddled beef 3 times a week, delivered it to cafes and hotels and places like that, and kept them up a business all the way through school, from before high school to plumb on through high school. And they didn't have any money at all. People couldn't pay me for that meat, but they would pay me in a voucher, just kind of like stamps. They'd go to the store, and they owed their soul to the company store, and they had to take everything that they made through that store. That's all they'd get. They wouldn't get no money, but they'd give me those vouchers, and who's the boss of the Black Springs Lumber Company?
Mr. Witherspoon.
Mr. Witherspoon was the president of the Black Springs Lumber Company, and he would let me have cash for those stamps. And nobody ever know it but just me and him. He knew that he'd give me the cash for them so I could go back and buy stock with it and keep peddling. And he helped me lots that way for 5 or 6 years that people didn't know it, and pay me cash for those stamps that I'd take up from the people that they'd give me for meat. They thought I'd have to go to the store and trade them out like they did, but I didn't. When I were taking them stamps in, well, he would give me the cash for them, and then I could go buy cattle. And people would think that they was broke now. I'd buy cattle, buy calves for $3 or $4 a piece. And you could buy a grown cow for $8 to $10, big fat cow for $8 to $10. You could buy a cow and calf for $10, and an extremely good one would bring 12. And I had about $200 to do business on, and I'd buy these cattle ahead, and I wouldn't move them. I'd butcher where I bought the cattle. I'd go out with my tools and swinging tackles and stuff like that, and swing that beef out at that farm and skin it, and just all I'd do was bring the meat in. And I've done that for several years. I guess 10 or 12 years in my life of growing up, that I would swing those cattle in somewhere on that farm. I'd butcher it and just take the meat in home. And I'd go out there and buy a day and ride a horse through the country to find these cattle. And when I bought one, I never moved it. I just leave it where I bought it. But I kept 4 or 5 head bought ahead all the time, so I'd know where they was and where I could pick them up right quick. And that's the way I run that business, to where that I was the only one that furnished the cafes and out at the mills and places like that. That's the only resource. They'd get their fresh meat from me. And it wasn't just a little while, it was 8 or 10 years of it. Dad would keep me working in this farm all the time, because I had to bring in the stuff there for them to have stuff to live on and make a living. And I realized that I had to do the work for them and raise stuff on the farm. And he'd keep me out of school so much till I wouldn't pass. I didn't get to go to school enough to get credits. And so I was behind a year or two, and so Rose would and me got engaged, well, she encouraged me to go back and go to school, and she'd help me. And that's the way we got, and the teachers cooperated with me to help me. I wouldn't go to school, but they'd give me the classes and let me study it and bring in my writing of what I had to do and stuff. And I didn't go to school over half the time, but still, the teachers helped, and everybody helped me. Well, they helped me pass and graduate from the school. And there wasn't 1 year, there was 2 or 3 years of it that way. Back in the 30s, it didn't just last 6 months. It lasted about 5 or 6 years, that depression did, and we was trying to get by and go to school and everything, and she realized that she needed to stay at home, just like her family was a large family, and she was the oldest one of the family. And she realized that she needed to stay and help them, and I had to stay and help my daddy and mother. And so instead of us getting married, we was engaged in everything. But when we realized that we could go ahead like we was and help our fathers and mothers, and they had to have our help.
Well, we just wasn't going to inform anybody.
Well, we had...
Of course, my mother knew where I was going.
We had planned, done told her fathers and mothers several months that we was going to get married. And one thing about it, my mother-in-law thought just of me just like I was a son. I'd been with the family so long till she treated me just like I belonged to her and talked to me like I was her son, and did to her death. She stayed that way all her life, and my mother-in-law was a stepmother to me instead of just being a mother-in-law. And I've treated her that way, and she always treated me the same way. And we decided to get married and told them that we was going to get married, and she got her wedding dress, and we got things fixed, and was going to get married on my birthday. And we told the people about it, so they went to ganging up was fixing to give us a big chivalry to do something. We didn't know what they was going to do, but we saw that they was really going to throw one when we got married. So we decided that we'd just get married and slip off and not let any of them know it. So we called the preacher and told him to get ready, that we was going to be up there in that while. As soon as we could get ready, we'd get married. It was about 4 o'clock one evening. We was going to be up there. By the time we got up there wasn't but about 200 people in town. There was that whole 200 was sitting around that house. They had beat us up there. Well, they knew more about it than we did, and where it got out, we didn't know. Either our daddies and mothers or somebody told someone that this went like mad for, and everybody knew about it before we got our clothes changed and got ready to get up there and get married. And we didn't get to slip off and not let them know it, so they stayed with us and wouldn't let us leave. They wouldn't let us get out of their sight, and so they rode me on a rail, and there was about 50 of them, and they took me down to the river and was going to throw me in the river. Of course, it was summertime, and it didn't make any difference anyway. So they throwed me in the river. Rosebud gave them all a big push, and they all went in. Her and all the rest of them. She made the whole bunch come in the river.
Had a baptizing right there.
But they come back out, then they shipwrecked us that night, and mothers was acquainted with us, baked cakes. And I just had 80 cents, all the money I had. And I bought 80 cents worth of lemons and sugar. Sugar was 2 cents a pound, 2 or 3 cents a pound. And I bought enough lemons and sugar. I made 2 washtub fulls of lemonade. And the mothers brought about 12 or 15 cakes in, and you talk about people having fun. They drank lemonade and ate cake and chivalried us all night. just beating on pans and ringing bells and shooting. They didn't have firecrackers. They had to
Oh, yeah.
make their own explosions. They'd take an anvil and set one on top of the other and put black powder on the inside of that anvil, and they'd shoot it off like shooting dynamite, and that old anvil would go up about 20 feet an hour, and of all the ringing you ever heard in your life, it'd do it. And they shot anvils, and they done everything, shot explosions and stuff, till everybody in joining towns knew that they was chivalry us. A lot of people worried about the 30s coming on then, and then people not making a living, but we had to raise from the time I was a child. We didn't depend on buying anything. We raised what we lived on, and we was already used to that. People on the farms, it wasn't new to them to make their own living, but people that went to big jobs and stuff like that and come back home, they didn't have no money, or didn't have a job, or didn't have no way of making a living. They didn't have any living, and there's lots of people got nearly on starvation because they didn't have a way to, or didn't know what to do to make a living when the 30s hit. And the farmers that had already been there, it wasn't new to him. He'd always had to make a living on the farm, and he already had his living. And what they had to protect is keep the people from stealing it that didn't have anything. And it got rough enough that you had to put up bodyguards to keep stuff that you had. They'd kill your hogs and kill stuff to eat just to get it. And it got pretty rough in 32 and 33. When they was coming back, people that had been laid off up in Detroit, and people coming back from those big jobs, they'd been in having good, and they got on starvation. These are the ones that really hit it. And these people that was selling cars as Radford, Oakless Radford and Roughton was in partners on Chevrolet, and they'd just sell anybody a car. They only brought from $500 to $600 a piece, but if they could get $100 down on a car, they'd sell it on a credit and just let people pay it out. And as they was working at the sawmill, they'd make little payments along on the cars, and they was doing a pretty good job of it from about 27 to 28, and then 29 hit the buster, and they'd sold a lot of these cars and had them out on a credit, and everybody was laid off, and nobody could pay for anything. And them people had 3 acres of covered of cars, and they told me to come down there and trade for one. I had some cattle, and I went out and drove in some good white-faced cows, and I traded 6 white-faced cows for a 29 model Chevrolet that was 300 miles on it. Just nearly a brand new one. And my dad had a running fit. He just like to die because I traded them cars them cows for the car. So I went to Fayetteville and went to school in 31, and I drove that car up there and wrecked it on the campus, and I had $250 worth of insurance on that car. And the insurance paid me that money while I could have bought 4 times as many cattle as he and me both had with the money, with that $250 as I traded for the car. And we paid $500. I'd take peak cake on a horse and ride in the snow and ice and everything and winter them cattle the winter before. All winter I'd done that, and I'd go about every other day and feed them. I didn't feed them every day, but I'd feed them at least every other day. And I'd just go from bell to bell, and they was running in the woods and in the mountains. I'd ride up on top of a mountain, and I could hear them bells where they'd be, and I know in the neighborhood where that'd go, I'd just go to them bells and pour them out some pea cake. And we spent $500 of that. And the banks all went broke next year. Well, Dad owed $500, and they owed us still $500. It was still in the bank, and they took the bank, went broke. It went to Mount Ida, and the federal government took charge. So the federal government come in and told Dad he had to pay that note, but he had to take whatever the money was left in the bank, what he could get for it. And that's the way he dealt with them. But I wouldn't have never took that myself. But he paid them all. We had to raise money in a hard way to get the money to pay them off the $500, and we got 10 cents on the dollar for our $500. We shipped our cattle the next spring, and I went with them to St. Louis. And there was 2 carloads of them. We had approximately 40 to 50 head to the load. We had close to 100 head, and I told him I wasn't going to go with him. That was a year before I went to Russellville to school. We shipped them to St. Louis, and they brought enough money extra to pay that $500 that he had to pay the federal government. The banks went broke, and he'd been just as well off the time that I traded the cows for the car, as drove them cattle in, had people come just get them on the butchery. They was all good and fat on the range, and he thought they was worth something. I thought they was worth something. But the next spring, we found out that the feed bill was all they was worth.
Well, my father was in grocery store business when the Depression came on, and he was trying to get moved out of town, down on the highway, to a place that he had bought and built a house down there, and was going to move the grocery store down there too, and that got caught right in the middle. Never did really come to fact of doing that, but he had borrowed money. He was one of those that anything was for sale, he'd try to buy it, and he owed him, and he would pay up the interest by covering something else. And finally it came to the point that he just gave up on it, and he just let them take what they had on the books. He had at least six rental houses, and a 120-acre tract of land, and I don't know, considerable property that he just let them have. But we had a home place, and we always call it home place in town. He never would put a mortgage on. And the land we were living on, and a store building in town, and you know, things like that. But money wasn't moving, and we were still making our living like always, even though he run the store and dealt in the land and so forth. But we had something to eat. We grew it ourselves and put it up. And
when I went to school, I was doing the butchering and teaching lab at the Tech, and it was raining a lot, and there was another boy driving a 31 model, A model Ford, and it had the brace rods up across the front of the radiator, and he got stuck and wanted me to push him back, and I had a gun in one hand that I'd killed a hog with, and I had a sticking knife that I'd stuck the hog with in my other hand. And I was in front of the truck and just wanted to push him back a little. The truck jumped back right quick, and my feet wouldn't move because I was in mud about 6 to 8 inches deep that the cattle had made stirring around in the lot. And my feet wouldn't move, wouldn't catch me, and my body fell in again the front of that truck, and that knife was in my coat pocket, and that brace rod caught that knife just right to make it stand up, and it stuck it up. The 5-inch blade stuck up on what my clothes held off of it, and it went between my 6th and 7th rib, plumb through the left lung, and just barely hit the strip of my heart. And I was kind of paralyzed for a month or so, but I finally come out of it. But they gave me the first blood-chilling shots that a man ever took that hospital. They gave it to me there, and then later in my life, I took the first blood platelets that was made from animals at Slane Memorial Hospital.
Clyde and Rosebud are the parents of 5 children. Their first, Alfred, was born in 1934, followed by Treva Lynette in 1938. 1940 brought the arrival of Clyde May, with James Doyle, J.D., making his appearance in 1944. The couple's youngest child, Rosetta, was born in 1950. The family now includes 12 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren.
Roosevelt come out with the idea of getting people started to farming again, and he'd supply people that didn't have anything. He'd let them have a horse or a couple of horses and milk cow and farm equipment. The government sold it to them on a credit, and they could start farming. And if they could rent, they had to rent some ground or buy some ground or get a hold of some ground to do this in before they'd set them up. But they'd set them up, and they furnished what were they called? The man that went around and
well, he was supervisor. I don't remember his official title.
There was a farm supervisor that went around and showed those fellas how to farm. And the people that done the best was the people that had never been on a farm in their life. It was interesting to them, and they wanted to try to take it and go with it and make a living out of it. And the fellas always been there. He drug around in 2 or 3 years. He lost the whole outfit. He wouldn't pay for them, didn't try to make a living or anything else. But the fellas that come back and never had been on a farm, most of them stayed there and farmed and done good. That they furnished the people that go around, I don't know what they was called, but they was instructors that went around and instructed the farmer how to do things, and seen that see too that they taking care of the government stock too. If they wasn't providing for them and everything, they'd try to help them get some feed and take care of them to see that they was fed. Lots of them wouldn't even feed their stock, and that farm instructor that went around, he saw that they was taken care of. I sold and traded horses and Rosebud taking care of them for 3 or 4 years that way. We went through that. It wasn't a little bitty thing. We bought and sold and traded, and her taking care of the cattle and taking care of the hogs and taking care of the chickens and things like that. Me on the outside trading all the time. And so I got a hold of a bunch of hogs, traded for them, and they took cholera. And the cholera got broke out all over the state, and our hogs all died. We had a truckload of good fat hogs, and they died with the cholera. So I knew my farm was infected with the cholera, that I couldn't trade them, and I had pneumonia in my horses, and it was catching too, and a lot of them had died with the pneumonia, and I didn't know what was catching from the hogs or all, but so many stock died. It took what money and profit that I had made, I lost it in my stock, so it was disgusting. And so the war was coming on, and my brothers was working in the oil field in Illinois, and one of my brothers called me and told me he could give me $5 an hour to help him roughneck on a tower of drilling. Well, big wages was $1.50, $2 in Arkansas, and that sounded like hitting a thing big way. So we just loaded up, went to Illinois, and went in the oil field and went to work. But I didn't have to hunt for a job. I just went to work for my brother, but it was paid by the company we was working for. And so I had several different jobs for the first year or two, but I had settled down and was working for McBride Oil Company, which was a big bunch of rich people out of Chicago. And they had a lot of oil royalty and about 200 or 300 oil rigs and stuff like that. It was a pretty good sized rig. And they drafted me in the Army, sent me to Chicago, and I passed and went into the Navy. So I come back home, and the head foreman was there when I hit the ground and come out to the doghouse to tell him I was goodbye. He says, "You're not going to the Army." He says, "I'm going to get a hold of the main people and see that you stay here." And sure enough, he did. But they drafted me in the Army just like I was on it, and gave me a red card. And I had to report on that, and the company had to report every week. And I didn't belong to the unions. And the unions had taken the oil companies, and a driller had to be a driller, and he wouldn't do anything else. And a roughneck had to be a roughneck, he wouldn't do anything else. And the pumper had to be a pumper, nothing else. And the union just taken over that they was, whatever category they was working in, that's all they'd do, and they wouldn't swap from place to place. But when they got a hold of me, I was a government man, and I didn't belong to the union, so they used me for anything they needed to put a man at. So I worked at anything that they had to do. It didn't make me any difference. I was there to work, and I was awful glad to be a working instead of going to the Army. This boy came back from the war. Why, he came back and asked for my job because that's where he was working, but they only had about 15 wells when he was there, and when he got back from war, they had about 150. And they had the same way about the tanks, and he didn't know anything about gauging and keeping a record of the tanks and oil and stuff, the production that there was going on. And I had to take care of production. And they didn't want to let him have it, and he was crying and wanted it. So I saw that they were going to have hard feelings, so I told them that I would just quit and leave. And so I did, and I went back, and we put in a frozen food locker at Walnut Ridge, the first one that had ever been in this country. And we stayed there and run it 3 years, and Earl Sloan helped me put it in and financed it. What I didn't, during the time I sold a farm at Norman, and that's what I put the locker in with, the money out of this farm that we'd left and went to the oil fields with. And Earl Sloan then, he picked it up. He saw that I'd put enough money in it that it was a good thing, and he had plenty of money. He was just a banker and had a couple of $1 million to go with it. And he just financed me and be partners with me. And so then he let Jack Cato have his part, and we agreed that if we couldn't get along, that we'd flip heads or tails, see who got it. And so we flipped heads or tails, and he got it. And I went out to the Southern Baptist College and built this little packing plant. We built it in later part of 49 and the first of the 50s, and we was there in business 20 years.
You know, we had inspectors all the time, but at this time they came a little more frequently, and you had to do this and had to do that to come up to federal compliances. So this day when they came in there to inspect, they came back and told me, said, now you didn't do this and you haven't done that, and this, that, and the other. And I said, we're not going to. I said, oh, you'll have to. I said, no, the only thing we have to do is clear these chill rooms and lock the doors. So that's what we did.
He got it about 6, 7, 8 sheets, and he threw them down one at a time to show her what they'd not passed on, things that they had passed on. Says, you got to bring this up to that. She reached over, got them, tore them in two, and pasted them over in the wastebasket. Said, now, you think we've got to do that? Says, we've not got anything to do but shut these doors. And says that I'm just giving you 15 minutes to get out of here. Says, well, don't have you thrown out with the law. And they got up and left and never come back. But they give us 6 months to clear the chill rooms, and that's what we done. We cleared it and locked it up. President Johnson was the one that backed it in and put that law in force, and he's the one that helped get it over, to put the small dairies and the small farmers out, and that was in '67.
Well, we had a fire in '54 and had to build back by, it was a state blueprint.
We got a small business loan.
Small business loan, and as it happened, we had paid that all off when all this came about, and we didn't owe anything like that anymore. And it would have taken all of our capital to have built, and we'd had borrowed money to operate it on, so we quit while we were ahead.
With the children grown and the packing business a thing of the past, Clyde and Rosebud moved to Benton, Arkansas. Clyde wholesaled for the Memphis Cap Company, while Rosebud jobbed women's handbags. It was also at this time that they began what has virtually turned into a serious and full-time hobby, collecting Indian artifacts and crystals.
Well, we started while we was selling headwear, and just before we got out of the meat business, we'd got interested in collecting a few artifacts. So it kind of grows on you if you get started. Why, the more you go and the more you do and the more you find, why, it makes you want to go more. And we got to collecting artifacts and digging crystals, because we was raised in Montgomery County where there's lots of either one of them. And so we got to finding a good many crystals, and after we quit selling, well, we just completely went to digging, and we'd go out with other families and ourselves, and we'd take our meal with us and just dig all day, or sit and look at the birds and watch the world go by. Up and down Saline River. Most of our artifacts is found in this Saline County, and 90% of them are out of the county here, and up and down Saline River, and the farmers cooperated with us. I'd go to them and ask them about finding stuff on their farm, and ask them about digging wherever I done. And I never went and dug on a man's farm without having a permit, and now I have a lifetime permit from International Paper Company, and Weyerhaeuser and Holland Land Company, a gravel company. They have 700 acres here on the river, and the several farmers has given me a written lifetime permit to hunt any time and dig any time I want to. Experts know the books, and somebody else wrote the book that he might have knew a little bit, but he just knew enough to write a book, and that's all they know. The more you dig and more you find out about them, you'll find out there's lots of things that's in the book is not like it's wrote, because the end has done things, and you'll find it by studying them and digging and stuff. In other words, a fellow wrote in Oregon that Indians would, in his book, that the reason there's so many on top of the ground, that when they shot an arrow point or killed anything with arrow point, that they didn't use it the second time. that they only shot it one time, and if they didn't kill anything or didn't get it, they didn't go pick it up. That's the reason they're on the ground, lots of them on the ground all over the United States, because they thought it done what they wanted it to do, and if they didn't get it to do it, well, that was their fault. They'd go make another airport. And this thing that'll let you know that he knew what he was talking about. He said if they killed an enemy with an airport, they'd go bury this point. And if they killed animals and stuff with airports, and they got that point, they give it a ceremonial blessing and buried it. And if they killed an enemy of theirs with an airport, they'd go bury it and with a point sticking straight up to heavens. And I've dug 100 sticking right straight up. And our business has always been together. She always had just as much say-so in everything as I did. And in us planning things to be done, I'd either go her way or she'd go my way, and we never argued about it. If it didn't work, it just didn't work. We never did throw it up to each other that your job or your things didn't do. Because I agreed to go her way, and she always agreed to go my way. It was just as much her fault as it was mine. And we just figured it that way. If our idea of doing business didn't work, well, we didn't argue about it. It was just part of the business, and we didn't throw it up to each other that it didn't work because we agreed on it. And we just figured it that way, and we always worked together just as a partner all the time in everything we ever done all our life. It didn't make any difference what it was. We agreed on what we was going to do and talked about it and planned it before it ever happened. And then that way we knew what it was all about. And we always never had no secrets from each other. Each other knew each other's whereabouts and what we was doing, what we was going to do, and all about it. These people that I worked under whenever I was a kid, they impressed me, and each one of them told me, I was young, but said, don't never tell the boys that were working on me, don't tell them a lie about anything, and don't you lie to anybody. You tell them the truth, you tell me the truth, and tell the truth the rest of your life. And they impressed it on me to where it was so important that if you do a business of any kind, why, stay on the truthful side of it.
The sheriff of our county told us just a few hours after his marriage, says, don't ever get mad at the same time, so. I held it till he was in good humor, and then I let go.